John, I've got 3 things on my mind.
All right, shoot.
Christmas is the worst.
Oh, geez.
The church needs scholars.
Okay.
And God is slow.
So, I do know this about you.
Yeah.
That for some reason,
For lots of reasons.
You're a little grumpy when it comes to Christmas.
Grumpy? Yeah. We're going to reduce this to grumpiness?
I am. You're a little bit grumpy. And it's weird because normally you're such a bubbly,
ray of sunshine,
positive personality.
Yeah.
The idea that you're grumpy about something is baffling.
Yeah. I told you the other day I'm going to be a really good grumpy old man when I get there. I feel like I'm
You're
equipped.
like the king of
I've been
curmudgeons.
prepared. Yeah. I mean, I'm ready. I'm ready to do it. Get off my lawn.
Okay, well, tell the people why you hate the Lord's Day.
Wait.
I just opened it for you. That was opening. I just teed you up right then.
I love the Lord's Day. Mm-hmm. I do not like the paganism of Christmas.
You don't like to talk about when Jesus was born?
Oh, I love to talk about that. That's called Advent.
All right, talk about so what's I've ran into a lot of views in my days,
I know.
and I'm just like, bro, hey, just relax a little, bro. Just enjoy, man. Enjoy the ride. Is Christmas a Christian holiday? No. Just have fun with it. You can't do that.
No. And here's why. Look, I was raised to love Christmas. I was raised to
That's a great upbringing.
Like everybody else. It's like the most wonderful. It is a time of the year and everybody is feeling cozy and the lights and there's music that for some reason everybody likes and everybody likes getting stuff and especially getting out of school and off of work and all of that stuff.
Wow, you're really selling me on hating Christmas right now.
All of that is a trap. It's all a trap. It's absolutely
It's a trap.
It's a trap. It's a distraction from what the church should be focused on. And if you tell me that those two things aren't mutually exclusive, then you have come to the point about which I have such a problem. Mm-hmm. That there is actually a deep conflict, not with hot chocolate and coziness, but with what Christmas is about in our culture. I'm just talking about, I hate the cultural phenomenon. Now, let me sort some things out, John. Let me just separate some things out.
You're going to get a little softer, maybe?
No. I just want to sort some things out.
Okay.
What the problem I'm actually talking about is the conflict between the cultural phenomenon of Christmas and Advent and the way that that's an issue in the life of the church. I will add, on a different note, I also find the lights and the decorations to be garish, and I find the music to be largely annoying. And
wow.
And you can drink hot chocolate and dress in ugly sweaters anytime you want. Go ahead. All of that is beside the point. It's also things that I don't particularly enjoy, but that's the stuff I like being grumpy about with my family and with friends because they find it so off-putting, which is entertaining to me. But the problem that I actually have, the reason I actually hate Christmas is because...
You really hate it?
I really hate it. I really... And
Can I ask you one thing? Are there any, or is there a Christmas movie that you do enjoy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Christmas Family Vacation.
Okay.
Of course, yeah.
Christmas Vacation is do you watch, do you like Elf?
Elf is funny. Yeah,
Okay.
Elf is good.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. I'm just curious.
I'm not saying it's impossible for the phenomenon of Christmas to give rise to comedy. It can and has, and that's great.
Home Alone.
I mean, very nostalgic. I remember watching that in the theater as a kid.
Oh, amazing movie.
Yeah.
Home Alone and Christmas Vacation are my two favorites.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
it's a tremendous movie about child neglect and abuse that everyone seems to overlook. But yeah,
great.
it's really great. It's great.
It's great.
fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there are aspects that you might not like. You might hate Christmas, but there may be a few little things you're like, okay, I enjoy that.
I mean, who doesn't love getting out of work and off of school for vacation and stuff? But that's not Christmas. That's just the fact that the culture as a whole has designated this time period as one in which we're not going to do those things. And you can do that for whatever you want, such as summer vacation. Like, doesn't have anything to do with being Christmas in particular.
Okay, so you were talking about Advent and Christmas, and
Yeah, and I want to be clear because I kind of come from a church tradition that would have like absolutely been appalled by a Christmas tree in the sanctuary and that kind of stuff. Like,
which we have in our church.
Yeah, we do, and that's not the issue for me. I mean, I joke about having a giant pagan fertility symbol in our sanctuary, and again, because getting a rise out of people is enjoyable for me. But like, that's not actually the paganism I'm talking. I'm not talking about the historical roots of it, and oh no, this isn't actually the day Jesus was born on, so we shouldn't do it. No, It definitely is the correct date for us to celebrate because the liturgical calendar tells us it is. Okay. Right? Advent is the season for celebrating the coming of the Christ and the virgin birth and the angel's annunciation and all of it. Like it's the right time to do that. Of course, like fir trees have nothing to do with that, but I think most people recognize that and just don't care because they love the tradition and putting stuff under the tree and decorating it and all of that stuff. People will get a kick out of that. I'm immune to that. Like I just don't. There's nothing about any of that I go like, oh no, I could never live without that. It's so important. I just don't care.
Are you for real?
Yeah, for real. I will give you.
You
gifts.
said fir tree, and I wanted to say it like faster.
Any time of year.
But it wasn't as good.
Fir tree. You were trying to do a word play with that.
I was, but I waited too long.
This is recording. You know this is recording, right?
Oh yeah, I just like to let it all hang out there. I don't care. I am who I am.
All right, that's fine. That's fine.
So, do you take the position that all of the cultural Christmas stuff, most of the time in Christian circles, drowns out Advent?
Yes. It is more important to people. Even people,
no doubt.
Even people who follow the calendar and observe Advent and are part of churches that are doing that kind of stuff. Even for those people, for virtually everyone, it is more important. All the feels are about all the other stuff. You don't have those feels about Jesus being born. It's like, it's Christmas time and I get to do the stuff and I love it so much. And it's like, yeah, you don't have any of those emotions about the thing that this is actually about, even if you're practicing a Christian. Huge generalization. In my experience, by and large, completely holds up, right?
Correct.
Okay. So
what about the McPeter's yearly Christmas party?
It's great. I love it.
Okay, thanks. Just wanted to make sure that was...
Because, again, I love it just as much as I love any other time that we get together and hang out.
Yeah, I got you.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like... Okay, so there's that dimension of it.
But that part of it is a good part, the community part, that there's a lot of people getting together and having get-togethers and stuff like that.
Yeah, a great byproduct of the fact that the country nationally deems this a holiday, a holy day, and there's some irony for you, is that people are given time off of work and given time out of school that allows for the community stuff to happen that always happens when that's the case. So so it's great that there's this sort of blocked period of time that, unlike summer vacation, where everybody feels obligated to like fill it up with trips and go to the beach and do all this, and everybody's equally busy and doesn't have time to be together, you have this weird sort of moment where it's like, most people aren't traveling unless they're going to be with family. and that's usually not for 2 entire weeks. And so you have a period of time where people are like, yeah, I can go to 3 or 4 parties right now. I can
Yeah.
hang out. I can do stuff, whatever, which is phenomenal. So it's a great byproduct of that dimension of the reality culturally. But I just want to be very clear. It is not okay that Christmas is in competition with Advent for the church's affection. And then on top of that, the second major issue is that I think everybody, at least superficially, should be aware of how grossly materialistic Christmas has become in
That's
American
very true.
culture.
That's something I cannot argue with.
And I see most people not knowing what to do about that.
Yeah.
Like they're just impotent to
Yeah.
we have to spend all this money and like again, nothing wrong. I'll buy you presents all year long.
I don't
Like
care. Yeah.
like that's not that's not the point. It's that there is this huge, starting with Black Friday, which is like, I don't know what kind of like it's peak paganism in American culture, right? And I'm using that word analogically. Of course, I know,
Sure.
but that's what it is. I mean, we worship at the altar of material stuff, and
That's right.
And
I have a writing coming out sometime where this Christmas I was really been thinking about how anti-consumerist mentality, being content with what we have, is a witness for the church, is an opportunity for us to say, no, like we're good. We don't have to do all this. We don't have to participate in the craziness of this, because we're satisfied. We're good.
So have you tried to do that with your family?
So it's interesting. So my mom would agree with you 100%.
Oh, really?
And like even growing up, it was a little bit different said. It was like, let's put Christ back in Christmas. And so,
Okay.
And it was just simply probably just not understanding Advent as much and stuff, right?
Sure.
Like she does now more, and like, but so she would always bring that stuff up. And yeah, like a lot of my family's like, we don't really have to get each other gifts. We don't really need to do all that. We still do. My brother didn't want me to get him a gift, so I bought him a Willie Nelson Chia pet. So that kind of stuff. Like I was just like, well, I'm gonna have fun.
Yeah.
He loved it, But no, I don't. I would say my close family, it's not this big thing like that.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you look at the amount of money that I spend on my children versus their friends, it's not even close.
Yeah.
And I explain that to them.
Yeah, and I really don't want this to turn into like a competition of who can spend the least on their kids or whatever.
Yeah.
My point in asking the question was there is unreal pressure to participate. And that's one of the ways that you know it's a problem.
Yeah.
You know that when you tell your extended family, like, yeah, we're not really going to do that much with gifts this year. And everybody goes like, you're what?
Yeah.
What now? And including my children. It's like, well, come again?
Yeah.
and so we are enmeshed in this. I mean, and the reason that I it's easier for me to talk about this is because this is the case for so many dimensions of our life in relation to culture, but it's really exaggerated at Christmas time.
Yeah.
And so
No,
it's
that's
easier
right.
to put your finger on and go like, look at what is going on here.
No, it
This
is
crazy.
The altar of
Yeah.
idolatry of consumerism and stuff. It's like the peak of it in America. No doubt about it. It's funny that whenever I've focused more on Advent in recent years, the time goes by a little slower. And I prefer, you know what I mean? Like, because I'm not so frenetically worried about, I got to do this and I got to do this and I got to get this gift for this person. And we do that, and we do some of that, but it's not. I feel like it's not crazy, and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and let me tell you, we do too. I'm not saying this from a position of moral high ground where we like do it the right way or something. I'm saying it's
you guys pass out, like cards that say, "I donated to this ministry. I donated to this this nonprofit and this organization."
I'm not flexing in any way. I'm expressing like frustration and disgust with the reality in which I live during the Christmas season, and just as every year that passes, it beats me down more. Like it feels so inescapable, And we've incorporated stuff in our family life to try to compensate and try to refocus and things like that. But I say I hate Christmas when I'm looking at the church.
Sure.
Right. And just this almost numbness to the fact that there's even any kind of friction here. You're like, well, what's wrong with it? There's no, you're just grumpy. You're a Grinch. You don't, it's like,
That's why I started out the podcast saying that.
And to an extent, I get why it must seem that way. There are a lot of issues about which any kind of resistance basically is going to produce for the cultural norm that reaction.
Sure.
Like, what's your problem? You're the problem.
Yeah.
We're all having a good time here. Why are you being a drag? Right?
Stick in the mud.
Yeah. And I was like, I'm sorry, but I can't reconcile these two things. I can't make sense out of this.
Okay, so I have known, multiple people and still know that don't participate in Christmas.
Yeah.
Because of that. Would that be your ideal? Like, would it be your ideal to say, let's focus on the Advent season, let's not buy gifts, let's not put up a tree, let's not put up lights, would that be your...
Oh, in my household, where this is not a reality. I mean, I am one voice in the wilderness here.
This is one of the only areas where your family doesn't just follow you carte blanche.
It is not. It is not. There are many areas, let me tell you. But this is a losing battle because this is so strongly ingrained.
Gotcha.
I mean, it is. And I said that in an Advent sermon this year. I go, I realize that I'm fighting a losing battle here. There's no way for this to make a difference, but I'm still going to say the truth about this, right? And if I had my way in my house, we would definitely not put up a Christmas tree and all that mess. We do put up multiple, manger scenes.
Yep.
What are they
Nativity.
called? Nativity. There we go. Found in our words tonight. So we have multiple nativity scenes. We put up art every year,
and those are definitely accurate.
The nativity scenes? Yeah, ours are. We do really, really historically accurate, fine detail. No.
3 wise men.
No, we don't. But we do try to direct ourselves. We put up some paintings every year that are about Advent, and at least I'm constantly saying, like, what are we doing here? What is this about? Why are we doing this? And they're sick of me just like everybody else is sick of me, but
it's okay.
I can live with it. I'm good.
So to come to a ending of this conversation, what do you think? What would you suggest? What's your suggestion to the church? Like, what are steps towards putting the focus back? If you're saying, I'm not saying that we have to. Ideally, yes, we would just say I'm done with it. But what are some of the things that you would tell parents that are listening?
You can't. What you can't do is simply nothing. Right? If you're going to address a cultural phenomenon, and for me, it'd be from a missiological perspective, right? You have practices, rituals, traditions, ways of life that are profoundly meaningful. They're deeply rooted in worldview, value sets, assumptions about what's good and what's beautiful. All of that stuff is going on. You can't simply say, don't do that. That never, ever works. And nor should you want to, because what we're talking about is a season in the church's calendar that is already fraught with meaning. It's already full of significance. And so I would say, as much as you can, replace that stuff. Replace it with other symbols and other traditions and other rituals that are about the thing that you believe the time should be about, right?
Do y'all have an Advent wreath at your home or no?
No, we don't have a we don't have a wreath.
Do you do any kind of readings as a family or anything like that? Because we don't, and I think we should.
Yeah, but not regularly. Like, we've done different stuff over the years.
Yeah.
We've done different like calendars and changing the days and all that kind of stuff. But mostly it's about filling, like in our house, which I think is pretty typical, it's about filling the space. The tree fills space, the lights fill space, the greenery fills space, the presents fill space. Like you're just sort of packing your environment with all of this stuff all of a sudden, right? For a lot of people, it's like the day after Thanksgiving, everything goes up. And okay, what stuff are we filling our space with? Right? Why, if we're going to celebrate, if we're going to say this is the period we're off, we're experiencing time differently, the rhythm of life changes, we're excited, something's happening, something's coming. What are you going to fill your space with, right? And just uninterested in the typical stuff.
Okay. All right. Well, that is Curmudgeon Greg. That's the Grinch coming out.
That's how I do.
And saying that we shouldn't. I mean, I agree with you. I have no qualms with anything that you said. Except for, just, I mean, just relax a little.
Yeah, just chill out.
Just chill a little.
Okay.
Just chillax, bro. But
Probably not going to happen in this episode.
All right. So let's journey on to your yearly, trip seems like too small of a word.
That's a big conference. Yeah. Yearly conference.
Trip is probably actually accurate, but I was going to say like pilgrimage, but that's not, that's a little much.
Well, I mean, honestly, it's a phenomenon, right? So we're talking about the annual meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature and the American Association of Religion. Mm-hmm. It's a combined conference, and it's tens of thousands of people in a convention center, right? So there is a sense in which you get there and it's like, wow,
yeah.
Like people have made a pilgrimage. Like this is a coming together on a scale that is unlike most other things that I've participated in.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah,
share with everybody like what it is in a nutshell.
It's very simply the major disciplinary conference for people in biblical, theological, and religious studies. So people who are academics, their life has something to do with scholarship, the academy.
The academy.
This is the major gathering of disciplinary experts to present papers and participate in panel discussions about the stuff that they're working on.
Nice. What are some highlights? Do you have some highlights from this last year? That'd be interesting to talk about. There's somewhere that we're going with this conversation as well, but I just curious.
Right. Well, so a couple from this year. One is what's always the highlight. The reason that I go, the main thing that I participate in is called the Forum on Missional Hermeneutics. So that's my area of...
Sounds like something you would be very interested in participating
in. My area of expertise is missional hermeneutics, right? Hermeneutics being the theory of interpretation, missional hermeneutics having to do with the theology of the mission of God and how that shapes our reading of Scripture.
Yep.
And so the forum sort of lives there at this conference. That's really the only place where it like gathers, and so it's sort of an appendage to the conference, and we have our own sessions and paper presentations and panel discussions and all of that kind of stuff. So that's always a highlight because I'm getting to meet with colleagues that I only see once a year unless we do a podcast or we, exchanging emails or whatever. So that gathering is always fun, and out of that has often come pretty significant developments in our conversation on missional hermeneutics. So it feels vibrant, because it's like everybody's working throughout the year on their stuff and doing whatever, and maybe somebody publishes something or whatever. But when you get together and you start throwing ideas at each other and the conversation happens, you go like, oh, I think we have a new direction here. Let's work on this. And it kind of sets the path for the coming year and that kind of stuff. And so that's a highlight. The other highlight is, I should say two other highlights because they're related. I mean, one is catching up with friends, right? So I hang out with and room with guys that I was at Fuller with for PhD work. So we get to reconnect and catch up and hang out and all that kind of stuff. And this year that led to me going to a session that one of them was presenting a paper in. And we have lots of conversations about this kind of area of work that he's involved in, which is specifically new developments in sort of New Testament studies in regard to the Jewish background of the New Testament.
Sold.
Jesus,
I'm into
Paul,
that.
right?
Yeah.
And so this is, and it's kind of hard to explain. I can like try to give you a thumbnail sketch, but the gist of it is this is an incredibly vibrant area of work right now. It's one of those areas that has had over many decades sort of various waves of major developments. And this is kind
Yeah.
of in the midst of the third wave of development happening. And so the papers and the respondents and the people in the audience are very locked in. They're very engaged because there's interesting new perspectives coming out of this on how we should be reading the Gospels, understanding Jesus, and then Paul and the first century church in terms of first century Judaism. And so one of my friends that's his area of expertise, and he's deeply involved in some of that groundbreaking work. And so I went to one of those sessions, and man, it was a blast.
That's awesome.
Just these people kind of hashing it out, and I mean, there's real disagreement about stuff, and interesting perspectives.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. So one of the reasons that we decided to have this conversation was what Greg opened up with and said the church needs scholars.
Yeah.
So I come from a background where not always, but often, the idea of the academy, the idea of scholarship, the idea of advanced degrees is almost looked upon with skepticism, because it's seen as more heady than it is listening to the Spirit, more the heart, listen, whatever is what they would say, listen. And so, I mean, I remember even going to get a bachelor's degree in theology, and some people were like, why are you doing that? It's weird because I know most church traditions, probably people would be like, yeah, bro, go, like, let's go, let's do this. But mine, it's a little like, yeah, what's the point? What are you trying to do? Won't the Holy Spirit teach you? He's your teacher. He's your guide. Why do you need to go listen to other people and learn things like that? And which I wholeheartedly disagree with that kind of mindset or whatever. But yeah, and so that's kind of what we were talking about on the road one day, and just thought this might be an interesting conversation. What do you say to the skeptics that would say you're getting too heady, and you're in the clouds, and it's not potentially practical for everyday Christian living. What do you say?
Okay. Well, let me start by saying we come from two different traditions that are in some ways
Similar.
Two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Right. Now, my tradition, Stone Campbell movement, started with some overlap with the origins of charismatic Christianity in the United States, separated from that essentially pretty quickly, and was heavily rationalist rather than spiritualist, and came to essentially the same conclusion by and large. Scholarship, which was at that time, we're talking early 1800s, tied to the church hierarchy, the clergy, sort of the elites.
Absolutely, same here.
That have control over how people understand the Bible and tell people what they have to believe. And so the Restoration movement, the Stone Campbell movement, was in large part about breaking free of some of that stuff, and was driven by a deep-seated American populism, which holds that sort of the virtues and wisdom of the common person are not only good enough, but they're all you need. And the conceit of the Stone Campbell movement early on was pretty basically that all you need is to read the Bible for yourself.
Yeah.
Just a basic,
That's very similar to the charismatic
straightforward understanding.
Yep.
The difference is that the fundamentalism that comes out of that is a rationalist fundamentalism. It's that any person can do a plain reading of the text,
Yep.
and with just the common faculties of any human being, you read the Bible and you understand it.
Yeah.
In your tradition, charismatic traditions, the fundamentalism tends to be spiritualist instead, and say, not that I am reasonable enough to make sense of this on my own, but that the Spirit's going to do it for me, right? And so I've got the Holy Spirit. The Spirit's going to guide me and teach me and lead me. And I, therefore, don't need any of that scholarly stuff. And in fact, that scholarly stuff is complicit with people who want to overcomplicate and make way too theoretical and abstract a faith which is practical and sensible and plain.
And people have said that, like, why would God give a revelation to people that you have to have all this background knowledge, all this, you have to understand the Greek or understand the culture, the context, or whatever. And in fact, even recently having people ask me that, whenever if we're doing a preaching series on something, or we've done teachings on things, and saying, but this doesn't make sense if the everyday person can't understand this. Why would God do that, Greg? Why would He allow that to take place? That doesn't make sense.
Right. I should be able to understand on my own.
Correct.
Right. And that's the populism. So you have there an example of one of those underlying hidden kind of worldview assumptions, right? There is a set of assumptions about the way things are that allow me to make that kind of assertion, and it makes sense to me to make that kind of assertion, right? But the problem is that doesn't mean that that's the way things are.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not a bad question. I get the question. I was raised to ask that question. Shouldn't I be able to understand it? I don't need you to tell me what it means. I don't need anybody to tell me what it means. I'll understand it for myself. So you hear the individualism of that. And I would say at this point in my life, the arrogance of that. It's pretty astonishing. Now, charismatics aren't as liable to that accusation because they're not leaning on their own understanding, to turn a phrase. They're leaning on the Spirit's understanding, right? And so there is actually a little more difficulty in untangling that particular knot, because it's difficult not to come off as saying the Spirit's help isn't sufficient, which sounds kind of like blasphemous, or at least just wrong in some way to say.
Absolutely. And that's the challenge of...
Yeah. It's a little easier for me to say to my tribe, seriously, you guys think that you're just rational and reasonable enough? That doesn't sound a little a little arrogant, right? But in any case, we're left with some realities that I think make those kinds of questions and claims border on the absurd, right?
Nice.
Yep. So first of all, when someone says to me, shouldn't I just be able to read my Bible for myself? Why do I need these scholars and these theories and these complex ideas? My first question is, I'm sorry, which Bible are you reading? Which Bible? Is it one that's been translated for you by scholars? So you don't need them. You're just going to read the Bible for yourself. Well, let's open our Greek text. Let's open our Hebrew text.
Go.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where part of the naivety of this is evident, and to a great extent, just the arrogant assumption, like you're not even seeing how much you are relying on other people.
And that's, for me, that's a big part of it. At least with my background, is the hyper individualism and the lack of seeing the church as a body. Yeah. Recognizing that there are, what I mean? That there are other people, that are other gifts, that to go, hey, God has been speaking to the church for thousands of years. He's been speaking. He spoke to Israel. He's been speaking. And so for us to just arrogantly say, well, he's told me this, and it's contradictory sometimes to what God has been speaking and what people have received as revelation from God through the scriptures for so many years just seems odd.
Yeah.
But I don't think people bring it up like that because especially when you live in America, everything is hyper individualistic. And then you have the charismatic church that I think, which I have a lot of things to be thankful for from that church. So
Same.
I'm not bashing it, but like some areas of critique would be that it's like, God told me this, so you can't tell me anything else.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? Are we not a body? Mm-hmm. Are we not called to discern together? Are we not a family? Like, is it just you and God and you kind of doing your own thing? But the questioning of that is seen as in a very negative light,
right?
Sometimes, and it's baffling to me actually. Yeah. And maybe for some people, because I bring this up to them, I think some people have never really actually thought about that.
Right.
They haven't. They've just been fed this their whole life and go, oh, I guess I haven't thought about us as a body, as a church throughout church history and so forth.
That's right. And so that's why I think the word naive, which is a very well-known sort of technical term in hermeneutics, there is naivety in the way that we read things, almost always with our first encounter. And that has kind of become endemic and almost institutionalized for a lot of church people.
It's where we get the naivety scene that you put up, and so this is actually like really working together.
So naivety, and what you're seeing very often, and I think this is right because I've experienced this. Again, this is how I was raised, and my journey into scholarship is very much about sort of dealing with these questions personally. I think what you're seeing very often is just a reflex. It's a reaction to the discomfort of recognizing there are some things that I can't know without the help of others.
Yep.
And when you get a glimpse of that, when you experience that, maybe it's in a sermon, some comment in a sermon, or some perspective that's given, and you think, I could never have known that on my own. I could never have come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
You kind of go, well, wait, but I want to be able to know that on my own. I should be able to know that. And so that reflex lays bare the naivety of that.
Yeah.
But what you were saying also leads me to the second point I would make beyond what Bible are you reading. You're already implicitly relying on people. And that is that Scripture, even a plain reading of Scripture, suggests that the church is designed in such a way that those with gifts of teaching and those with gifts of knowledge are not every member of the church. And so, of course, you have to rely on people who have been given those gifts. Now, granted, many people wouldn't think of those gifts in terms of scholarship. They would think that's a different thing. I am of a different opinion. I think that actually, not exclusively, but to a large extent, the academy is what happens when the waves of history produce a curious effect. It goes very simply like this. The church invents the academy. The academy is the church's invention. And I'm talking Western academy here. I'm talking universities, right? There's no such thing as a university that wasn't first the product of the church, not in the West. And concentrates those with gifts of knowledge and teaching in these institutions. This is the late medieval period. And then as those societies go through various throes of secularization and modernization, those institutions begin to become separated from the church and sealed off. Even though when we're talking about explicitly Christian institutions like the ones that you and I studied at, they're still affiliated in some way. They're still connected, either denominationally or in very broadly Christian terms. They're still playing the game of what is now the secular academy in order to gain accreditation, respect, enrollment numbers, contributions, right? And so there's a particular cultural phenomenon happening that is ultimately the siloing of the church's native knowledge and teaching gifts into this thing that now the church, as populism and individualism are on the rise, and people are feeling that they don't need the clergy to understand God or the Bible. They're looking at these institutions with suspicion.
Yep.
And now it's the ivory tower, and it's
Yep.
the elites over there. And populism teaches you not actually that elitism is bad, but that we're all elites. It's a generalized,
Yep.
popularized elitism.
Yeah.
You're claiming over there to have some kind of special knowledge, but the fact is we've all got knowledge.
Yeah.
And so the consequence of that is devastating for the church, because now you have local congregations, even congregations where scholars are members of their churches, that have no clue what any of that's about, and it feels foreign and a little bit of a threat.
For sure.
And so that's the context out of which this conversation began, where I said, I got to tell you, it's super awkward for me to tell church people I'm going to SBL, because consistently, as long as I've been going, if anybody asks, their eyes glaze over immediately.
Yeah.
They're like, "What are you talking about?
Yeah. No,
what
that's
are you
right.
doing?" And I'm like, I'm going to participate in the thing that produces the body of work that trains
Absolutely.
the people that you hire.
Correct.
That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. So a couple things. Number one, yes, like as a preacher, pastor, for a number of years, I am forever indebted. Like, I know in the charismatic place there are. I don't know anyone that doesn't read other people. Like even charismatics, like they're going to read other people. They're going to learn things from other people. So like to pretend like that's unnecessary, whatever. But another question I have to you is there, since you are in the throes of it, I'm not, because you are a professor, is there a critique that is needed?
Yes.
In the sense of like the ivory tower, the headiness, also I'm involved and been involved in disciple making movements, and sometimes in the middle of that there are people that are saying, you're trying to tell me what to do, but you're not even doing it. Like you're just sitting around studying it, but you're not actually participating. Which I know that's the whole thing that you're into is missional hermeneutics. So you do think that there's some rightness in some of the critique to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so I live in these two worlds, right? Congregational ministry and scholarship. And the areas that I focus in my scholarship are specifically about bridging the rift between those two things. So that's the way that I've grown to talk about it. The metaphor for me is there's a rift. There's been a seismic shift that has separated church and academy in an ungodly way. And the church is right to be suspicious, because listen, I've read a whole bunch of stuff that gets produced in the academy that makes me go like, say what now?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not as though I'm sanctifying that whole environment.
And you're saying that everything is all good. Yeah.
No. I'm saying that there's a whole bunch of us playing in that sandbox with a set of commitments and convictions that the church ought to recognize, and conversely, doing work that the church needs.
Yeah.
Whether anyone in particular is in a place to sort of recognize why that is, that's how I think. Okay. Yeah. So bridging that rift comes from multiple directions. One is to say, look, there's a problem with a lot of academic work that is a consequence merely of specialization. So if you go really deep on something and you get all the way into the weeds on a topic that the church needs you to do that for, you're speaking in terms. I mean, necessarily, you have to develop language to even talk about concepts that maybe haven't even really been articulated before. And when you develop that language, it's not the church's language. And so it's unrecognizable. This is what, I mean, and what I'm talking about, everybody can experience this very easily. Simply pick up a technical book in your own field. In your own field, whatever it is. You're in nursing, you're plumbing, physical therapy, it doesn't matter. And consider how much of the language that if you handed that to somebody who is not an expert, they would go like, I don't know what that is or that is or that is. Like, what are you talking about, right?
Yeah.
That is necessary for any kind of profound understanding of a body of knowledge. And so the problem is those scholars are neither equipped for nor interested in very often translating what they're doing for the church. They're relying on a trickle-down effect.
Pastor.
They put it in the hands of professors who train graduate students who are hopefully, some of them, not going to go to the academy, but instead go to the church, right? So I did a Master's of Divinity. That's a practitioner's degree. It's very broad and very deep. It's dying because of that, because of the cost of that. It's from a different era when people could afford to spend 4 years in theological training for ministry. It's not an academic degree, although it is rigorous academically, because that was the sweet spot. That was where the academy and the church were saying, we got to get together and produce ministers who are equipped to walk the church through the theological struggles that are inevitable. So that used to be a thing, and it's diminishing. Most MDivs across the country have been contracted. Many have shed biblical languages.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, they've reduced hours and requirements because enrollment's down. People can't afford to do it. You can't do a residential degree. I mean, the cost of moving your family and living in a new place and all that, it's so complex because of our economy.
It's become so easy, I thought about getting one.
Yeah, well, but
I'm kidding.
And no shade on the online alternatives. I mean, I could say some things about the difference between in-person and online learning, but we'll shelve that for another episode. But the difficulty of relying on that trickle down is that most pastors who are getting a master's, say a Master's of Divinity or just a Master's in Ministry, it was like a 2-year degree, they're also not going to be capable of doing a great deal of translation from academies to regular speak. So you're relying on basically what they internalize and the way it shapes their understanding, so that now when they're doing ministry or they're doing preaching and interpretation, it's influenced by that.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
It's trickle, and it gets smaller as it goes down. Right. So there's not a lot of scholars who are capable of going super deep and then coming up and turning that into a popular level book.
Yeah.
The ones who do are very well known and very well respected. Yeah. But it's like switch hitting. It's incredibly difficult to do.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that critique. Like, you need more people in the academy committed to making their work available, not just to the regular church person, but even to the regular person in ministry who can read a few books a year. They're too busy visiting people and taking care of the work of the church and all the rest of it, right? They can't be in this mind bendy struggle of understanding something. They just need, right? And so, unfortunately, because of that, what happens is they end up reading the stuff that is published on a popular level by populists who are an inch deep.
Yeah.
Right? And that becomes the fodder of the preaching and teaching of the church because of the rift, because the academicians are over there doing their thing, and their only hope of influencing the church is the trickle down, right? Okay, from the other side, the problem is the church should be the environment from which academics work.
Agree.
Now, this is the one that I get much more in trouble for, right? With my academic friends, I'm asking a king's ransom from them, right? To say, you should be doing your work, whatever kind of work that is, in the native environment of the church. The faith community, the worship and prayer of the church,
the mission
and
of the
the
church
mission of God is the context in which you should be doing whatever it is that's your specialty, right? And that should be shaping it. That should be informing what you're doing. And I can imagine for textual scholars who are focusing on minuscule linguistic questions that have to do with ancient Syriac, they're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
That has nothing to do. And I just want to say, I'm sorry, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Like, but especially for those who are working on commentaries, even technical commentaries on the Bible, for those who are working on questions of biblical interpretation, you ought to be, I'm sorry, it's a high-handed sounding thing to say, but this is my conviction. More of us ought to be immersed in the life of the church, immersed in what God is doing among our neighbors in a way that affects our scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
So there ought to be this mutual exchange happening, and that's the crossing of the rift. That's the bridging work that is so difficult to do.
Is there any kind of intimidation from the scholarly side of things about getting in with that, or is it just not? Is it just like the nature of a lot of the people that go down that path, that it's just kind of a disconnected? It's kind of
Disconnected. It seems unnecessary. In fact, so many of us are taught in various ways along the way that not only is it unnecessary, it's detrimental.
That's strong.
Okay. And seriously, because
Really?
yes, because so much of biblical studies, for example, is historiographic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, modern methods of historical study, and we're talking about the methodological level, the technical level, where you're saying, here are the parameters for how we do work that is acceptable to experts, right? The conceits of that are absolutely atheistic, right? And so what you would be accused of doing is skewing with bias your understanding, your faith, your theology is changing the way that you understand the data.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And so now we've got bias in there. And instead, we good atheistic, and I'm not calling these people atheists per se, but they're using an atheistic method. We are neutral. We're objective. We're not influenced by that stuff. We put that on the shelf. We don't let our faith
So people could push
influence
back
our
to
work.
what you're saying because of that all day long.
All day long they do.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
This is a significant battle in the last, I would say, 30 years, which has resulted in another kind of sub-area of study that I'm really involved in. It kind of overlaps with missional hermeneutics. It's called theological interpretation of Scripture. A number of New Testament, Old Testament scholars and theologians have worked together on this project to try to come from both directions. Because again, what happened was biblical studies, New Testament and Old Testament, really got co-opted by this idea of objective neutrality, of scientific neutrality that's methodologically atheistic. And so we had guys, like full-blooded evangelicals and evangelical programs and seminaries and colleges and universities training everybody that comes through in this way, because this is what's legitimate. This is the way that you do the real work, right? So multiple generations of this happening, and eventually a group of them that I so love and appreciate. It's a big group across a whole bunch of different traditions, but ultimately some momentum was gained, and you started seeing these works and these conversations appear where they're going like, our faith is changing the way that we do this work. Wow. It doesn't make sense to do it in this way. Yeah. And we actually want to talk to theologians rather than acting like the theologians are the enemy. Because this is probably strange to people to hear, but it's so normal for anybody in the academy that it's almost comical to try to explain it. Like, in the theological academy, progressive, conservative, doesn't matter. For the last 200 years, there is an absolute divide between the faculties who are experts in biblical studies and the faculties who are experts in theology. Because the theologians are suspected of being biased and closed-minded to the historical data and what the text says, and they produce these works of theology that basically just sort of, They just proof text. They just use the text without understanding context, without understanding history. They don't understand the Bible. They're just theologians. And the theologians are looking at these guys like they're heretics, right? Like you don't know God. You don't understand the tradition and history of the church. And so this impasse develops. And this is what these folks are trying to, men and women both, are trying to overcome. And they start talking together and producing works in collaboration, even where you've got a multi-author work that is half biblical scholars and half theologians, and they're both contributing and saying, this is how we need to be approaching Scripture and working on it together.
Interesting, yeah.
That's theological interpretation of Scripture, and my professors and my colleagues in that field will probably kill me for that description because it's not very fulsome, but that's the gist of it, right?
Nice.
That there is this push to kind of bring things back together. And my work in particular has been about saying, that is great. Are we being clear that what the church is bringing to that is also, among other things, participation in God's mission?
Mm-hmm.
That our engagement in what God's doing, what the Spirit's doing beyond the walls of the church and our worship and our faith and our practice, beyond that, among our neighbors and the share that we have in that is also what the church is bringing to this. So this is all like we somehow landed. I apologize if I've gone too far down the rabbit hole here, but this is what I like cared so much about. I've given so many years of my life to working on these kinds of issues.
Yeah, because I think people in the church would say, that's way too broad. Some people in the church would say, it's about what you do, not about what you think or whatever.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Of course, I would disagree with that because what you think and whatever is affects what you do. But you know what I mean? Like they're up there, they're doing their thing. But, hey, we're going to be judged based on, depending on your interpretation of Scripture, what we actually do, like whether we're actually caring for the widows, whether we're caring for the orphans, whether we're actually out there doing it. And so that's what I get a lot of people give the pushback to the people that are not participating in that as much and or whatever, and be like, well, and that's where they make the error and just say, well, that's of no value and that's stupid.
Right.
Like that's not true. But I love the whole idea of bridging those things together, and I want to see that more.
Yeah, the way that the divide between church and academy manifests is in language about theory and practice.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you guys are all about theory. Ideas, you're up in the clouds, like you said, and up in the ivory tower. We're over here doing stuff. The practice is over here, right? And that, I won't get into where that comes from because it's way more complex than people realize. That way of talking and thinking is that you can even think of those things separately is a fundamental error. There is no such thing as practice that is not informed by theory or theory that is not informed by practice, by experience, by doing, right? That's inescapable, and weirdly people on both sides try to pretend like they're just doing their one thing. It's not real. And that's very much what my work in saying, talking about the mission of God and the church's participation is about, is like reckoning with this truth. There is nothing more practical than good theory. Nothing more practical. And that's a truth that the church just really needs to grapple with. We can talk about what the academy needs to grapple with. And
unpack that just a little bit.
We're out here caring for the widows and orphans. We're doing our thing. Okay, good. Well, how about the theory of sustainability? How about the theory of dependency? How about the theology that's informing when you do that and why you do that and how you do that? There are so many ideas informing what you actually do when you turn around and go, well, we're doing the work. And it's like, yeah, which work are you doing? Which work is that? Why? Well, how are you doing it? Are you thinking at all after you do it about what it means? What are its consequences? How is it changing your mind? Right? Theory informs practice, and practice informs theory, in a circle. This is actually called the hermeneutical circle, right? That truth, when it's lost on people, results in really worthless theory and really anemic practice, right? And you want neither of those things.
Yeah.
You want a happy life together where you are informed and continually changing your mind about what you're doing.
Yeah.
And where what you're doing is continually shaping how you understand reality, truth, goodness, beauty, life, right? When you divorce those things, it's devastating for everybody involved. You could take an easy example because we're just talking about caring for widows and orphans. Like that's an easy one, right? You can read that right off the surface of the prophets. And then Jesus. You can go, I know I'm supposed to do that. I'm going to do that, right? And then you look at what church people are doing for those communities of disenfranchised, marginalized, poor people, right? Look at what they're doing and the devastating consequences from doing it foolishly, right?
Yeah.
This is where the church needs to understand that the wisdom tradition of Scripture is written by those elites.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
written by the ivory tower folks, right? They're the ones going like, pause, let's gather together our best understandings of things, write it down, share it with people, insist that they seek understanding and insight and discernment, right?
We are called to do those things.
And if you don't, then the way you live practically is going to be foolish.
Yeah. Wow. I think that's a good way to end that part of the conversation. What do you think?
Yeah.
Move on to
Point number 3.
Yeah.
Well, I said my issue, but actually, this is more about you reading a book right now that I recommended. And
Yes, you did.
Yeah, so we're talking about Slow Church by C. Christopher Smith and
Right, you can
Pattison.
pull it up,
Pattison is the last name.
that sounds accurate.
I've read various
various
books by C. Christopher Smith, so I remember his name easily. But Slow Church.
Well, this is something that as he's pulling that up, that you told me I should read this because we were having these conversations about slowing down and all these things. And he's like, "Oh, you should totally read this because this is really good for
John Pattison." Come on, man.
Wow. This is our relationship.
What is it really good for?
The everyday person.
The everyday person. Yeah.
And it's funny because I tend to really love to find books like that, that you can kind of a conversation that we're having.
Yeah.
But you can find people that can write this to where everyday people can understand it. And yeah, really good so far. Do you want to give a synopsis of what the book's about? I haven't finished it yet, but I've read a lot of it.
Well, it's been a minute since I read it, so the authors will have to forgive my rendition here. But
they're probably listening with the other million or so listeners.
Yeah. I mean, you could send it to them. That'd be an easy way for them. Like, just tell them.
Yes, that's fair.
Just skip to minute, whatever.
Yeah, we can.
Well, the idea in my recollection is that the slow food movement is an interesting model for thinking about other aspects of our culture, all of which are shaping the frenetic nature of the church's life. Right. So if you're not familiar with the slow food movement, it was a response some time ago to the fast food movement, right? Not that you should go to a sit-down restaurant per se, but that the impulse for Americans to get their food fast and eat their food fast and move on with their lives is really significant given the importance, especially even in other cultures, of the time we spend together in meals, right? And being together and the process of cooking and the communal dimension of table fellowship and so on and so forth, right? And so they extrapolate from that initial comparison to many aspects of the church's life that need to slow down for theological reasons, right? So the reason,
And missional reasons.
yeah, missional reasons, absolutely. Well, I would consider missional theological.
Intertwined.
Yep, absolutely. But when I recommend this book, I've recommended it to a variety of people. What I say is this is one of the best examples that I know of a book that does a close reading of a part of American culture.
Yeah.
And this is missiology, even though these guys are not missiologists, right? But when you do this really deep, wide analysis of a part of American culture that is eating the church alive and respond theologically, I get really excited.
Yeah.
And it's such a good example of that.
Yeah, it is.
And so that's the gist of it, that, you know, you could just say, well, the church needs to slow down. But what we're talking about is the theological implications of the church slowing down in the midst of a culture that is out of control with haste and busyness and anxiety and all of that.
Yeah. So whenever the church planting movement took off crazy in the early 2000s,
Talking about CPMs particularly?
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe a little before that.
Mid-90s.
Yeah, a little before that.
Mid-90s, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, whenever that took off and you see these churches being planted everywhere and all these people doing all these things, and I was part of it. You know, I planted a church, you know, with a friend or whatever, and you read all these books and stuff, and there's all these strategies, and a lot of times you're, you know, sitting back going, this is the fast food like method of doing church. Like, you're not, sometimes we're not slowing down to think of positive and negative the implications of what we're actually doing. So you see things like negatively, you see the big churches that are planting themselves places, and we're not having conversations with other local churches in different areas to say, how is this affecting, like, what's going on with this area? What is the work that's being done in this neighborhood? What's taking place? And then we end up finding, you know, things, you know, oftentimes where we've bought in with the way our culture is we just stream to those kind of things. And that, you know, that's a very small portion of the book, but something that I've been thinking about, you know, quite a bit, and the implications of that. But then also the idea of missionally, theologically, churches slowing down and rooting themselves in their neighborhoods, rooting themselves in their cities, taking the time to discern what God is doing and how do we participate in what God is doing. So much of the American church is just about doing church. Like, let's do church and let's see how many people we can get to join our Sunday morning services. And this book is saying, whoa. And I'm a huge Wendell Berry fan. This is actually, I think, how this conversation started. It was like, I'm just like rethinking, oh my, life and like food and everything that we're doing, and going, what are we doing, and how that affects the church, man. It's significant.
Right. And so we're talking about lifestyle. Right. Not just, you know, the church is busy and trying to do a bunch of stuff and maybe scattered in its focus and not paying attention. Like, all of that's true. But what the book is highlighting is how much that is a function of the forces that are shaping our way of life. Right. And an alternative way of life is the proposal. Right. What if we step back from that, see it for what it is, and begin making decisions about living in a different way? Right. And that would have implications for, say, attractional church. Right. So I was going to read one of the quotes that stood out to me in the book. It says, "The primary work of slow church is not attracting people to our church buildings, but rather cultivating together the resurrection life of Christ by deeply and selflessly loving our brothers and sisters, our neighbors, and even our enemies. As we holistically embody Christ's love, we find joy that we pray will draw people closer to Christ." Now, that could be written in all kinds of books. You didn't hear the word slow in there.
Sure.
It wasn't specifically about slowing down. But the point is that without addressing this cultural problem of haste and frantic activity, that general stuff about paying attention to what Christ is doing in our neighbors, loving our enemies, living joyfully, is impossible in ways that we don't even perceive.
That's right.
We don't understand. The barriers there have to do with slowing down.
That's right. And one of the things that I mentioned in the book that I thought was, right on, and I'm just cheering it along, is like the fact that many of our churches are transient, or can be, in the sense of, hey, there's a new strip mall that's open. Let's go start a church. Like, let's not start a church. Let's move over there. Hey, let's go move. Let's do a building project over here. And there is no thought of how it affects the neighborhood we're currently in, because we're not really doing anything in the neighborhood that we're currently in. And what the heck, bro? Like, why? What's going on? Like, what are we embodying here?
Yeah.
It's crazy, man.
It's crazy. Our logic is dependent on ways of understanding the world, ways of seeing the world. And so if the way that we see and understand the world tells us that it's logical, it's sensible to do that, it's very hard to perceive how illogical that actually is, right? You could talk about like a gospel rationality.
Sure.
But that's not saying much,
Yeah.
right? Like, what do you mean by that? What is it to say that the gospel is shaping our way of thinking, our way of reasoning about what makes sense, what ultimately makes sense for us to do? And so what they're giving us is a piece of that puzzle. Like, part of what the gospel does is invite us to understand that God is slow. God is slow. And so if we're going to follow God, we should expect slowness,
movement.
Right? And I think that that's a provocative way of putting it. Now, I don't even know if they say the sentence "God is slow" or something like that. That's where I'm going with it, right? Because I think we need that kind of theological grounding to resist the temptations that the culture puts before us to be quick and agile and constantly on the move and
100%.
energetic, and like, I mean, I'm a fan of work. I'm not into like sloth or something, but I recognize that there is a siren song out there telling us church planting should be fast, conversion should be fast, growth should be fast, everything should be happening fast. If you're following God, that's what, like, it's like a natural consequence. Like, if you're in tune with the Spirit, it's all going to happen fast. And it's like,
wow, that's interesting, isn't it? But it really is. Like, there's no doubt about it. Like, we read books from people who planted a church, and a year later they were 1,000 members, or whatever, and we're like, oh, that should be us. That should be us. That should be everybody there. And we assume that they're linked up with what God is actually doing, just because a bunch of people showed up to a service on Sunday morning. And what that compels us to do is try to hack fast. We try to do, what are the things that we can do that will make it the fastest? Right? How do we get more people here faster? Right? That sort of thing. How do we get more results faster? If it's not people, if it's ministries, results, whatever those things are, faster, right? And if God is slow, if we start there theologically, that's a huge challenge to us, to that way of thinking. It makes us go like, ooh, there's some real dissonance here. Why am I thinking this way? And so God is slow. Think about history. Think about the arc of redemption. Think about how long God takes to do things, to call a people, to form a people, to take on flesh finally, and inaugurate the kingdom of God, which takes forever to. And Peter's like, The Lord's not slow to fulfill his promise, which means people are like, what's going on here?
That's
Why
right.
is this taking
That's
so
right.
long?
And let me say, that is a human reaction.
Yeah.
That is a transcultural reaction, right?
Yeah.
That's not an American saying that.
No, that 100%.
Right?
Yeah.
That's everybody coming face to face with the truth that God is slow.
Yeah.
God works in ways that God can be as fast as God wants.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that he can't. I'm not saying
Yeah.
that the Spirit can't move quickly.
The day of Pentecost, there was a lot of people like, yeah.
Whatever. Look at the narrative of Scripture.
Yeah.
It is fair to say God is slow.
Yeah. But you know what's frustrating, scary, whatever, is like thinking through like, this is generational.
That's it.
This is generational. And
Yes.
to think that, oh man, well, my impact wasn't
Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
because I'm not seeing it in that
Yeah.
big picture idea is like, oh, I don't want to be like that. I want to have this major whatever.
Yeah. So the slogans, this is one of the crazy products of this way of thinking, right? The slogans that dominated the world missions movement for 3/4 of the 20th century were essentially some version or another of proclaiming the gospel to all nations in our generation.
Yeah.
In our generation.
Because that'll, yeah.
Right?
That's
Multiple
eschatological.
motivations. We've talked about the motivations
Yeah, yeah.
when we talked about Christian nationalism and Zionism and stuff like that. One of the major motivations there is provoking the return of Christ, right? But that's not the only one. There are a lot of people involved in this that get psyched about in our generation completing the task.
Yeah, we could do it.
Completing the
Yeah.
task in our generation, right? Which requires a great deal of haste.
Mm-hmm.
It requires like a tremendous amount of go, 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 go. Pedal to the metal, don't stop, right? And when I look at the grand narrative of Scripture, what I see is a call to faithfulness in our generation.
Mm-hmm.
Faithfulness in our generation.
Yeah.
Not finishing the task in our generation.
And I think that's part of the problem is what are good results? Like what is, what does that actually look like, and what are we saying that it is? Because if it's churches that are blossoming and getting a bunch of members, then I might rebut some of that and go, well, hey, 98% of church growth is transient. Are we actually making a difference out there? Are we just saying, hey, look, we have David Crowder at our next service, so we're actually the Walmart Supercenter of the 90s, 2000s, when that was like it's changed a little bit. Like people have gone to more mom and pop shops now, but during that, like you come in, you move in, and everyone goes to that, and it just destroys all these little communities that are all around. And we think about that? And again, if we think that just getting more butts in the seat for Sunday morning is the end goal,
right?
We have some major problems.
You don't say,
so to speak.
Yeah, you don't say. So as you're thinking about this, like, what are you thinking is the way that you slow down here? Like, what does that look like?
That's a lot. That's a lot. And I'm always thinking in community, and I think that makes it more difficult because you may say, or I may say, I'm ready to slow down. I'm ready to spend time listening to the Lord as a community. I'm ready to engage with people in the neighborhood, ask questions of like what's going on, and like try to actually understand before I jump into ministry, which I'm so guilty of. Right. The assumptions.
Yeah, you are. You're super.
Yeah, no, I am. The assumptions that, oh, well, this neighborhood, this city needs this. Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Without thinking through who's already doing things and what's actually happening. Yeah. And that is, I've failed in that in the past, Greg. Like I really have without. And I think that's really, really detrimental whenever we do that. Instead of actually taking the time, as you're saying, to slow down, taking the time to ask good questions, taking the time to understand what's happening, taking the time to be prayerful, and discerning what is God up to? What's happening here? And I hate to say it, as long as I've been in ministry, I can't say that I've come across a lot of, man, I really don't want to be negative. A lot of churches and ministries that do that
Right.
say, let's go slow. Let's figure out what's happening. What our piece to the puzzle is. How can we help?
Consider the cost of doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, just in the most obvious terms, there's a financial cost to doing that.
100%.
Right? You got to grow a church fast
Yep.
and big to sustain the salaries of ministers who are dedicated to doing whatever this thing is.
Yeah.
Like, the funds aren't there
Yeah.
for most people. And so they're doing it on a prayer at the beginning. And there's an immense pressure to figure it out and get to a point where their family's okay.
Yeah.
Right? And you
No,
could
that's
just,
right. 100%
absolutely.
right.
You could just go down the list and start naming all of the impulses that make it necessary or seemingly right to operate in this manner.
Yeah.
Right? So nobody would say that this is easy. It's costly.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? I would number it among the costs of discipleship. And it makes the church look weak. It makes the church look inept. It makes the church look vulnerable, right? All of which reminds me of the cross. And so I'm okay with that, like well, let me use the dirty word from earlier, in theory. But I've lived through it. So I know that there's a big difference between being okay with it in theory and then having to figure it out.
Is it sustainable?
That's right.
You're right. Is it sustainable to take time to slow down, whatever? And yeah, salaries, building costs, which is why I have people that'll be like, we don't need building, all these kind of things, because if we're going to go slow, then there's no way that we can do that.
And consider that what we're talking about is American culture and its influence on the church, which means that if the church decides to model an alternative lifestyle, that is not going to be attractive, right? There's a reputational cost.
Yeah.
Right? You got Americans looking at a local congregation that goes, we're going to slow down, we're going to do it this way. So many people are going to go like, ooh. I've seen some churches do that real fast, and they've got a bunch of people, and they've got a big budget, and they've got ministries, and they're bringing in David Crowder, and they're doing whatever. And that looks like success to me, right? And so the church is then going like, oh no, what are people making of this? Because it doesn't. And again, it makes me think of the cross. Okay, there's nothing about the cross of Jesus that makes outsiders go, sign me up. Right? You don't look at it and go, this is the best PR campaign I've ever seen.
Yeah.
There's something so subversive about the cross. And we have to reckon with the fact that it is foolishness to the wise and a stumbling block to those who think they know better.
Yeah.
And that's what it is.
And that's Jesus and his parables of the kingdom.
Yeah.
It takes time. And why do we ignore that? Do we think that we're better?
Yeah.
And I say better, which is not accurate, right? Because we think that our way is better.
Well, yeah, again, this goes back to that sort of underlying logic. It's like, I can't even think about better in different terms.
I know.
I can't think about I don't even know what that means. How would you not want to grow a business fast? How would you not want to be successful and put out products quickly? How would you not want to move, right?
Yep.
How would you not want to go in every day and get it done?
Yep.
There's no way for me to think about that. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. That's crazy. And that's, but I mean, unfortunately, I think that's the model of the church that we got, right? This kind of business centered, results oriented. And again, I would question what results are and what that actually looks like and what that actually means. But that's really what has happened, and we're struggling. And I think that again, this is a challenge, is because we have done this for such a long time. We're ingrained in American society here to find people and to disciple people into slowing down is freaking hard as crap, bro. Because it's just like we don't understand, we don't wanna, That is costly. That's going to take time. That's going to, oh, we've talked about this before. I have 3 softball games this week. I have all this stuff going on. Where is the time to figure out what's going on in the neighborhood?
Yep.
Where's the time to be in prayer with community about what God's doing and how can we participate? Yep. It's tough, dude.
Yeah, schedules alone, man. Schedules alone are the bane of my existence. Like,
is that worse than Christmas?
Availability of people for stuff is just killing me, right?
No, I know,
including me.
Yeah,
including
no,
me.
I know. We're trying to do a disciple group at our church. Like Greg's been doing these for a while, and there's one that we're getting started, and it's just like literally today we're trying to figure out when we can all get together, and it's a freaking nightmare.
Yep.
You're like, oh, well, I can't do this day. Oh, but I can do this, and it's like, and I get it.
Yeah, but let me be like, I've gone through this a bunch of times, and again, on a very personal level, and like making decisions with my wife. Mm-hmm. And the question is, very appropriately, which part of your schedule is going to die?
Yeah.
Something's got to get crucified. You can't do discipleship if nothing's getting crucified.
How do you disciple people to that? Like, no, I'm serious. Like, that's what I was thinking. That's what I was thinking today. I'm like, how do I challenge? How do we disciple people to go, what's more important? Like, what's going on over here? Like,
yep. Which is why I've told you, and this is an interesting phenomenon, I think, in the sort of regular church body. Mm-hmm. I've told you that when we've started discipleship groups, we've tended to start with people who were basically desperate in one way or another. 1 foot out the door, questioning their faith, wondering if this is all there is to the church, so on and so forth, right? And that hunger, that like serious existential uncertainty about like, what am I doing here? Where am I going with this? Is the fuel for the conversation that you have, right? And the conversation is, and I've told you this, it's like, it's very sort of blunt. It's like, you can't do this if you're not going to give us some time. Yeah. It's going to cost some time.
Yeah.
That's the only way that this works. And if you're interested and you really want to participate, but you don't have the time, then tell me no, because I there's no way to make it work.
Yeah.
If you're not available.
Yeah.
And that sort of desperation has resulted in people going, all right, I'll give it a try for a season.
Yeah.
Right. Let's try it for a season and see if maybe there's something there. Right. When you try this with regular church people who are like, yeah, I think I need to do more discipleship. I'm interested in that. 100%. I think that's important.
But
good luck.
I know. And I think that, and maybe, and this is where I think I've struggled in the past and failed in the past, is not willing to slow down and be patient and disciple people into that. Like I've just got kind of thrown my hands up and been like, well, if you're not interested, then forget you, to a degree. And that's not healthy, and it hasn't really helped.
Well, it has to be a pastoral kind of discernment.
Yeah.
Right. It's not one size fits all. Right. And I'm not saying there's one way to do this, or that by any means we figured out the right way to do it.
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
No. But there is a need at times to choose between going slow and hand-holding and issuing a summons. Right? There's a call that happens. It's like, this is the time for you to make a decision. And I'm not making it for you, but this is the time to make a decision.
Yeah.
Right. And you have to decide in wisdom and prayer what that approach is with any given person. Right.
So what do you think? So in my discipleship training, a lot of it goes along the lines of this. you need to find people who are serious about it and leave everybody else behind. I don't mean like serious, like it's kind of how it is, right? Like, and that's what the approach I took for years is like, try to find people. If they're really interested, then good, let's go do this thing. And if they're not, then whatever. And I don't think that that's super healthy either, because I'm also non-confrontational.
Well, there's that, but I'll tell you my issue with that is that is another version of one size fits all. That is not the only way to do things.
Yeah.
Like if you are slowing down, asking questions, learning your context, discerning what the Spirit's up to, then you might come to the conclusion that is a stupid way to proceed.
Yeah.
Right? Or you might come to the conclusion that is actually, in this place with these people, that's where we need to go.
Yeah.
Right? So anytime I hear somebody go like, this is how you do it, this is the right way, my immediate reaction is, oh, you don't understand discernment.
Yeah.
You're not interested in the fact that different places and different contexts require different responses.
Yeah.
And like, to me, the beauty of that is you're essentially assuming a posture. If you slow down, you're assuming a posture that says God can go at God's own speed, and things can happen however they need it. And my identity and my self-worth and my satisfaction is not going to be wrapped up in how this goes, right? Which is a huge challenge for guys like you and me. It's a huge challenge, right? Because so much of our identity is wrapped up in, I mean, you can call it results, or to use a gross word, outcomes, or whatever. But if you can grow beyond that, then God does really interesting things. Yeah. So I'll tell a story. Because things went in an unexpected way for us in Peru. Let me preface the story by sort of making a plea that I really like to make as often as possible, which is for the American church to understand that it is in a missionary situation.
Yeah.
And ought to be learning from foreign missionaries how to live in their own environment.
Absolutely.
Right? And one of the standard practices for foreign missionaries these days, given what we've learned, is that you enter a place that's foreign to you as a learner. And you give yourself more time than you might want to learn.
Yeah.
And so we took that advice. We were trained well. We were prepared. And so we moved to Peru with the intention of taking at least a year and a half
to understand the
now
culture.
Think about that.
Yeah.
A year and a half to do nothing except learn.
Yeah.
Language, culture, environment, all of it.
Yeah.
Right? So that was our whole job description.
Yeah.
Which you come to find out is more than enough for a full-time job.
Oh, yeah.
If you take it seriously.
Oh, for sure.
It's more than enough.
Yeah.
Right? And that is the case here as well. You think you know your own city. You think you know your own people.
Yeah.
You don't.
No. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, please.
No, I was going to say that, like, I think one of the challenges becomes that we read books. We hear about these awesome things that happen. For example, here in Murfreesboro, like, we had a group of guys that, like, we felt compelled to go to a hookah bar. And we just spent all kinds of time there, and we saw, a young man who was Hindu come to faith and stuff. But people don't often talk about the many times where nothing freaking happened. Nothing. Like, we went and we just hung out.
Yeah.
Like, for months.
Yeah.
And nothing happened.
Yeah.
But people, oftentimes we don't hear about that because we hear the story of, I won't say this guy's name, but this guy coming to faith, and like, we write about it, we blog about it, we whatever about it, and we don't recognize it. Like, dude, that was like 20 weeks before of nothing happening, but just trying to be faithful to what we felt God was calling us to do.
Can you celebrate the waiting as much as you celebrate the success?
We can't. We don't.
We don't.
But we can.
And I can tell you as a missionary,
Yeah.
it's a huge blessing to be sent by churches that are on board, where you tell them ahead of time, look,
That's it.
this is all we're going to do for
Yep.
18 months.
Yep.
So every report we write you will be predicated on the assumption that we did not try to do ministry.
Yeah.
We did not. There was no expectation. We were not looking for it. Nothing was supposed to happen. So having those sorts of arrangements is very helpful, right?
Yeah.
Even if for yourself it's like, oh, it's a real struggle because I would like to be getting some stuff done.
Yeah.
Right? But having gone with that intention, here's what happened. We entered language school. We're serious about full-time study, trying to figure out life, rent a place, learn how to buy groceries. I mean, all of it. Like, it's crazy in a cross-cultural situation. And it was as slow as we expected
Yeah.
with discipleship,
Yeah.
church life, all of that stuff. But we went with the intention of doing two things. One was evangelism and house church planting and building communities of faith and discipling people. And the other was manifesting the good news of the kingdom through service to poor communities.
Yeah.
Right? So holistic ministry, development work, all of that kind of stuff. But with that stuff as well, we went with the assumption that we had no idea what we should do,
Yeah.
what we could do, what God was up to, none of it.
Yeah.
Right? And so we were going to take that same year and a half to figure that out. Except when we got there, the language teacher who tested all of us to place us in appropriate levels quickly became a friend and then wanted to share with us some ideas that he had as someone who was also working in development work and partner with us. And then we found ourselves launching a nonprofit, and then we found ourselves working in communities like so much faster than we anticipated because God was at work ahead of us preparing something. And so we had two different timelines. One was going really slow, no less effort involved, no less listening, no less waiting, but the other was full throttle.
Yeah.
And that thing went bananas, right? And so what I learned from that is God is slow. That's the big story.
Yeah.
And if we slow down, God has permission to do whatever
He
God wants.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
And so to me, slow church is about taking that posture and saying, this isn't about how fast I go. This isn't about what happens because I'm doing stuff. It's simply about keeping in step with the Spirit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Spirit can march. The Spirit can sprint.
Yeah.
The Spirit can saunter. It's all good.
And I think that there's the challenge is the expectation level of the church.
Yeah.
And the sending churches, what we expect to happen, and that is the biggest challenge. I mean, maybe not the biggest challenge, but a big challenge of us all buying into let's slow down, and
yeah,
it's a challenge. I mean, it's been very difficult for myself to want to do that.
Yeah.
You want to be one of the persons that
you want to be the success story, and you want to be able to write to your supporters and go like, your money's well spent. Look here.
100%.
Right. And if you want to let anybody else know, you can send something.
It'd be great.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's,
Absolutely.
So the church has we have to slow down. We have to, And I know that we should end here pretty soon because we've been going for a while, but that affects, you said lifestyle, that affects everything that we do. And learning to do that is challenging. It can be painful. It can be very difficult.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, slow down. Appreciate your scholars. And quit fooling with Christmas.
I'm just kidding. I'm with you. I'm with you. That's wordy.
That's it. That's the word.